"That car is dead," the CEO said with a cold laugh in front of the entire garage. Mechanics smirked. Employees whispered. The rusty old car looked like nothing more than scrap metal waiting for a junkyard. But standing beside it was a quiet single dad who had already lost almost everything in life. What nobody knew was that the next 30 days would change all of their lives forever. And when the truth was finally revealed, the same people who mocked him would stand in complete silence. Stay until the end, because this story will remind you why you should never judge someone by their struggles. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Kind Soul Stories for more emotional and inspiring stories that touch the heart. Daniel Harper stood quietly outside the massive glass building of Callaway Automotive, staring at his reflection in the polished doors before walking inside. His worn boots carried years of struggle, and the faded blue shirt on his back had been ironed carefully the night before by his little daughter Lily, who always tried to help in small ways. At 38 years old, Daniel looked older than he really was. Life had carved exhaustion into his face after years of pain and sacrifice. 3 years earlier, he had buried his wife Emma after a long battle with illness, and since then, every responsibility had fallen onto his shoulders alone. Raising Lily, paying bills, surviving endless debt, and keeping hope alive had become a daily battle. He fought silently, but despite everything, he still carried kindness in his heart. Outside the building sat his old 1967 Mustang, coughing smoke from its damaged engine after barely surviving the drive there. The car looked terrible, covered in rust and scratches. Yet Daniel gently touched its hood before entering, because the car was the last memory of his father and the happiest years of his family's life. Inside the company garage, luxury vehicles gleamed under bright lights, while skilled mechanics moved confidently around expensive equipment. Daniel immediately felt out of place among them. Some workers glanced at his old clothes and quietly smirked. Others ignored him completely. He kept his head down and focused on his work, hoping only to survive his first day without embarrassment. Hours later, during lunch break, loud laughter suddenly echoed outside the garage. Curious employees gathered near the parking lot, and Daniel followed nervously. The moment he stepped outside, his stomach tightened. His Mustang had completely died, and was now sitting in the center of the lot, with smoke rising from under the hood. Standing beside it was the company's powerful CEO, Richard Callaway, dressed in an expensive black suit and holding a coffee cup, while inspecting the car with disgust. "Whose junkyard disaster is this?" Richard asked loudly, making several employees laugh. Daniel slowly raised his hand, his face burning with humiliation. Richard walked around the Mustang with a mocking smile before tapping the rusted hood. "That car is dead," he said coldly. "Honestly, I don't know what's worse, the car or the man still driving it." The crowd burst into louder laughter. Daniel stood frozen as shame filled his chest, but he refused to argue. Instead, he quietly placed his hand on the broken Mustang and looked at it with pain in his eyes. In that moment, while everyone else saw scrap metal, Daniel saw memories of his father teaching him how to drive, Emma smiling beside him on summer nights, and little Lily laughing in the back seat. To him, the car wasn't dead at all. It was the final piece of the life he once loved. The humiliation Daniel faced that afternoon stayed with him long after he returned home. As the sun disappeared behind the small buildings of his neighborhood, he sat silently on the front steps of his tiny rented house while staring at the broken Mustang parked beside the curb. The cruel words of Richard Callaway repeated endlessly in his mind. "That car is dead." Inside the house, unpaid bills covered, the kitchen table like unwanted, reminders of how hard life had become. The electricity notice was overdue. Lily's school payment needed to be submitted within the week, and the refrigerator held little more than milk and bread. Yet despite the pressure crushing his shoulders, Daniel forced himself to smile when Lily walked into the room, carrying 2 cups of cheap instant coffee. "You'll fix it, Daddy," she said softly while sitting beside him on the steps. Daniel looked at his daughter and felt both pain and strength at the same time. Lily had inherited her mother's gentle heart, And even during the hardest moments, she somehow still believed in him completely. Later that night, after putting Lily to bed, Daniel walked back outside carrying a flashlight and an old toolbox filled with rusty tools. Cold wind moved through the quiet street, while neighbors watched curiously through their windows. Some whispered that he was wasting his time. Others pitied him. But Daniel ignored them all as he opened the Mustang's hood and stared at the damaged engine. Oil leaks covered the metal. Several parts were broken beyond repair, and the car looked hopeless even to him. For a moment, exhaustion nearly defeated him. He leaned against the car and closed his eyes, remembering the happier days when his father would spend weekends teaching him about engines, while laughing proudly beside this very Mustang. Daniel could almost hear his father's voice saying, "A machine only dies when the person fixing it gives up." Suddenly, the front door creaked open behind him. Lily stepped outside, wrapped in a blanket, holding a small flashlight in her tiny hands. "I can help," she whispered sleepily. Daniel smiled sadly and lifted her onto a chair beside the car. For hours they worked together under the night sky. Lily handed him tools while asking innocent questions about engines and tires, trying her best to understand things far beyond her age. As Daniel slowly removed damaged parts from the engine, his fear slowly transformed into determination. He realized this wasn't only about repairing a car anymore. Every bolt he tightened felt like rebuilding a broken piece of his own life. Every scratch on his hands reminded him that quitting would teach Lily the wrong lesson about struggle. Near midnight, Daniel discovered an old photograph hidden inside the glove compartment showing Emma smiling beside the Mustang. Years earlier, on the back she had written, "Some things are worth saving, no matter how broken they seem." Daniel stared at those words for a long moment before wiping tears from his eyes. Then he picked up his wrench again and went back to work. 30 exhausting days passed, and the morning of the restoration competition finally arrived. Callaway Automotive had transformed its massive showroom into a glamorous event filled with bright lights, television cameras, wealthy investors, and reporters from across the city. Expensive restored cars lined the polished floor while mechanics proudly stood beside their creations, wearing designer uniforms and confident smiles. Richard Callaway walked through the crowd like a king admiring his empire, shaking hands with guests and enjoying the attention. Everyone expected one of the company's elite teams to win easily. Meanwhile, outside the building, Daniel sat quietly inside his Mustang with both hands, gripping the steering wheel tightly. His heart pounded with nervousness as Lily adjusted his collar and smiled at him proudly from the passenger seat. The car looked completely transformed from the rusted wreck people had mocked a month earlier. The black paint gleamed like glass under the sunlight. The chrome sparkled brilliantly, and the engine now carried a deep, powerful growl that echoed with life. Yet Daniel's fear had nothing to do with the competition itself. He feared being laughed at again in front of his daughter. Lily gently placed her small hand over his and whispered, "Mom would already be proud of you." Those simple words gave Daniel the courage he needed. A few minutes later, the loud roar of the Mustang's engine echoed through the showroom entrance, instantly silencing the crowd inside. Heads turned in shock as Daniel slowly drove the restored car onto the main stage area. Conversation stopped completely. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment, unable to believe this was the same broken vehicle Richard had publicly humiliated. Weeks earlier, Daniel stepped out quietly while Lily climbed beside him with excitement shining in her eyes. Richard stared at the Mustang in disbelief, his confident smile slowly disappearing. He circled the car slowly, touching the polished body as if trying to understand how such a transformation was possible. "Impossible," one mechanic whispered under his breath. The judges immediately gathered around the Mustang, amazed by the craftsmanship and attention to detail. But then came the moment nobody expected. One of the organizers announced a surprise presentation on the giant screen behind the stage. Suddenly, videos recorded secretly by Lily began playing for the entire audience. The room watched Daniel working late at night under freezing weather, repairing the engine alone after exhausting work shifts, falling asleep beside tools, and skipping meals so he could afford replacement parts. Emotional silence filled the building as people saw the painful reality behind the beautiful car. Some audience members wiped tears from their eyes. Even hardened mechanics looked away emotionally. Then the screen showed Richard mocking Daniel beside the broken Mustang 30 days earlier, loudly declaring, "That car is dead." The atmosphere instantly changed. Richard's face turned pale with embarrassment, while all eyes moved toward him. Daniel didn't smile or seek revenge. He simply stood beside his daughter quietly, his dignity speaking louder than any words ever could. The showroom remained silent for several long seconds after the final video ended. The emotional footage of Daniel's struggle had touched every person in the room, far more deeply than anyone expected. Wealthy investors, who had arrived only to admire expensive cars, now looked at the single father with genuine respect. Reporters quickly rushed forward, cameras flashing as they tried to capture the powerful moment unfolding before them. Daniel stood quietly beside Lily, overwhelmed by the attention but holding himself with calm dignity. Then the head judge slowly stepped onto the stage, holding the competition trophy. His voice trembled slightly as he announced, "The winner of this year's restoration challenge is Daniel Harper." Instantly, the entire building erupted into thunderous applause. Many people even stood to their feet clapping, while Lily hugged her father tightly with tears streaming down her face. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment, struggling to believe what was happening. Just 30 days earlier, he had stood in that same place being mocked for driving a broken car. Now, the very people who laughed at him were cheering louder than anyone else. As Daniel accepted the trophy, reporters pushed microphones toward him asking how he achieved the impossible. He looked down at Lily before speaking softly into the silence. "This car survived because someone kept believing in it even when everyone else gave up," he said. "People are the same." The audience applauded again, this time even louder. Nearby, Richard Calloway stood frozen with guilt written all over his face. For the first time in years, the powerful CEO looked small and ashamed. After the event ended, many expected Daniel to celebrate wildly or humiliate Richard publicly. But he did neither. Instead, he quietly packed his tools into the Mustang while Lily sat smiling proudly inside the car. As they prepared to leave, Richard slowly approached them alone. Gone was the arrogance in his voice. He looked tired, humbled, and almost nervous. For several moments he couldn't speak. Finally, he glanced at the restored Mustang and admitted quietly, "I was wrong about you." Daniel remained silent, listening calmly. Richard lowered his eyes before continuing. "I spent years believing success came from power and money, but you built something far greater than this car." Daniel looked at him for a moment before answering gently, "Sometimes people only need someone who refuses to quit on them." Those words hit Richard harder than any insult ever could. Weeks later, videos of Daniel's story spread across social media around the world, inspiring millions of people who were struggling in their own lives. Daniel used his prize money to open a small restoration garage named after his wife and daughter. Young mechanics from difficult backgrounds soon came, there not only to repair cars, but also to rebuild hope in themselves. Above the entrance hung a wooden sign with a message that became famous online. "Nothing is truly dead if love and belief are still alive." And every evening, as Daniel and Lily drove the restored Mustang through town together, the sound of laughter inside that once broken car proved that some miracles are built one painful day at a time. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kind Soul Stories for more powerful emotional journeys that remind us all never to give up.